though about 4 or 5 years ago related to it, because like I felt I was basically being guilt tripped to not take my legally allowed number of sick days. Because I was taking them off to help kids or that, and they're like, you've been gone a lot. I'm like, I'm still within my limit. Like, don't give me a benefit and then make me feel guilty for using said benefit.
Yeah, that's that. The thing is, like, you can tell that there's pressure on them because of what's going on, but like, if you don't understand, like, that's kind of like what we need to do as teachers is to essentially understand what's going on with kids. And, if somebody's not going to give you that same courtesy, that's kind of offensive.
Well, and like, I kind of wonder, given that it was rural Iowa and everything, if I was a woman, would I have gotten that? Is that it's sort of expected for the mother to ask for time off to run the kids here, there, do that. But I don't know. That's
a can I don't want to go into.
Nope.
I mean, I said, like
I don't really want to analyze it, but like part of me is just a tad curious. I have no evidence to suggest that, but
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, Andy, of like all the developed nations, we give like the least time for maternity leave. So yeah, the least time for maternity leave. So it's still expected that it's almost like one of those. I'm pretty sure, Andy, that like if you had been a woman in that situation, I think that there would have been like this sort of like, this is why we don't hire women for, I don't know, but you're in one of the accepted professions. So, like you can be a nurse, you can be a teacher, you can, but that culture, honestly, I mean, it already just sounds ancient and it's going away. It's, it's only maintaining any sort of support and very remote,
The number of colleagues that were like, oh, you're going to have to learn to cook and do laundry. I'm like, years, man. Like, I got that covered. I'm not going to have to develop an entirely new skill set in this endeavor.
No, yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's like during college, obviously, like every guy has to take care of himself, has to learn how to do things, to take care of himself. So, I mean, like it's not like those are tasks that are below you, if you live on your own. So why would they change it all when you're in a relationship? Like anything needs done can be done by anyone. That's kind of
yeah. No, that stuff is, I don't know. It gets weird. There's so many social. Bleh.
Yeah, well, but dude, you don't care about that stuff, Andy. You really don't. I mean, like, let's all be honest. I think that you would rather have people look down on you. Like, you take spite and like, it's like you have a hybrid battery inside your heart that turns spite into energy.
Or something. Disproving people's notions. That's always fun.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or what was it? No, I had a student one time that made some sexist comments. I'm like, dude, just so you know, I have a daughter. I'm about the last teacher you want to be making those comments around. He's like, oh, freedom of speech. I'm like, yeah, you can freedom your speech right up to the principal's office, too.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes into what our topic is going to be here because, like, like you choose, like you have the choice of words when you say things, and like it's, freedom of speech does not, like, a lot of people think it means speech without consequences. It's like, no,
there's still consequence.
Yeah, like you can still say it, but there's consequences. Just like you can do something and there's consequences. It's
the government can't stop you from saying those things, but society in general can punish you horribly for it. All they want to.
Well, and we do that to people. We do that. We remember every little thing that people say, and then we, like play it back to them to remind them. And I will be the first to admit, anybody that's listened to me on the podcast, I have contradicted probably everything I've said in my first. If you listen to the first run of episodes and you listen to this episode, you will hear me literally just directly contradict. Like I would love to be able to have like, it wouldn't be epic if I were in it, but it would be like a rap battle with my former self. You know, like I wonder, you know, I just think, I think me now wants to meet me then and be like, dude, like listen to yourself and think about somebody else besides, you know, that voice in your head for a moment. And yeah.
See Joe do a rap battle. Please get on Twitter at Good Board Ugly. Want rap battle, like hashtag.
Yeah, Good Board Ugly rap battle. What is you know, it's gonna be between me and my former self though. That's what I'd love to do. I really do want to enlighten me then about the thing, and honestly, that's one of the things that sort of drives me further to keep like wanting to put this out, you know, and to keep putting together the show. And I'm not saying that I need that, like I need like a bunch of motivation to keep driving me, but like that's one of those things that's like, no, like because of those initially really, like, I don't know, I would say natural and instinctive, but I don't know, misguided and combative, maybe.
Yeah. What you guys don't notice is like Joe has all these positive affirmation signs all over. Like he can look at whole podcast. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Although literally I was helping a friend apartment shop like 7-8 years ago, and when they were showing her the apartment, we looked at like the guy literally had the walls covered in those. I'm like, really?
Like the posters that are like the man on top of the mountain didn't fall there.
Yeah. See, the only of those I ever put up in my classroom, and I'm amused that I was never caught for it, was the Despair Incorporated calendar. Have you seen that?
No, Andy.
It looks exactly like those motivational pictures they have on schools, where it's like a picture and the quote. The only one I thought I could leave up there permanently was science-based, because it had like, you know, a shooting star. Mm-hmm. And underneath it said wishes, and then the quote was like, you know, when you wish upon a falling star, your dreams really can come true, you know, unless it's one of those mass extinction event or varieties.
That's what those falling stars are really good for.
Yeah. Another one I did like, underneath it said, not everybody gets to be an astronaut.
Nice. Not everybody gets an astronaut. Says the guy who loves science. Like, hey, everybody, it's you know, you're not all going to make it, even though you all want to be this cool science thing. Nah, you're not going to make it. Just letting them know early. And good to good to nip that in the bud, Andy. Good to get them in 6th grade. That way, by the time that they're in 9th grade, their hopes and dreams have already been crushed.
Oh, yeah, no, we do that anyway. It's when I teach genetics. Like, you remember when your elementary teachers told you can grow up to be anything? That's a dang lie.
Well, I mean, there's honest truth to that. Oh, by the way, Trent, I do see that you're here. I don't mean to be ignoring you. Hey.
Hi.
Good to see
there
you.
is. I mean, like, you can train all you want to be a professional basketball player, but if you have somebody train equally as hard as you and has the genetic gifts to be an exceptional basketball player, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know, though, Andy. Like, I understand that argument. I understand where you're going with it, but I feel like there is an element to determination, and I mean, like, it's too simple to just say somebody trains as hard as you. Like, there is always just an element of scrappiness, never gets beat. Like, because I mean, I tell you, seeing like tennis players go to state, like, it's not always the most talented tennis player with the most preparation that comes away with a win in a match. I mean, there's so much psychological going on. I mean, it makes it worth seeing. You know, there's always something that makes it worth seeing. And I'd say it's the same way, you know, when you go into a board game, just like, you never know like how things could fall. Like,
by the way, this is also my way of plugging my new podcast starting next month on social Darwinism. No, I am not doing that.
Yeah. I'm gonna say, Andy,
Steve King influenced me. Social Darwinism.
Oh god. Well, guys,
I guarantee I'll never get a job in the middle school in Boone now.
Andy, yeah. Actually, you know, I don't know. No, I don't want to be responsible for you here.
No, you don't want that. I'd totally be telling students, like, take Spanish, and make his life miserable. These are the things you can do to
You go ahead and come to Boone, Andy, but that's going to be your prerogative. I'm not going to inflict the people of Boone with you. I'm not going to like call upon the plague of locusts that comes with you.
Yeah. My wife is always amazed that they let me near impressionable minds.
Speaking of impressionable minds, we have chat people here.
Chat people.
Come on into our live chat while we record, and tell us about all the impressionable things that we have said that you went and tried to live your life by that have essentially ultimately led to the ruin of you, which you can squarely blame on us. Put it on my shoulders. I deserve it.
There was another like Despair Incorporated poster. The quote was like, "Did you ever think your life was an example for other people of what not to do?"
That's actually a good question to have. Like that's encouraging reflection, and I appreciate that. It's encouraging a negative source of reflection, which yeah, it's good. It's like a smoke alarm, but just don't leave it turned on.
Yep.
So guys, Trent, Andy, unfortunately, crowd, we're not going to have TC with us tonight. Wish you all the best, TC, and hope that everything that you've got to take care of tonight goes well. I know that he's kind of got to be a bit of a family man and take care of the people in his life. So anyway, TC, cheers to you. Hopefully everything's going well for you. And we're going to get started then with our upcoming episode. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Joe Sallin. It's good to be back, everybody. Thank you for accepting and embracing, even though he deserved it. Let's give him at least, even though he's got the despair calendars hanging up all over his house, telling him how awful he probably is and what he really deserves. Let's at least applaud Andy for taking over. I appreciate it, Andy. It's good to have somebody to take over for me when I've got some, things that are kind of pulling at me from the exterior. So it's just good to be back into the circle here, together with Trent Ham, who's joining us. Trent, how you doing?
Pretty good. Let's do this.
And also, you already heard from Andrew Dennison. Unfortunately, TC Reed will not be joining us on tonight's episode. Hopefully, he will be back. And it sounds like this is just a couple of things he's got to take care of that just are pulling at him from his exterior. So anyway, TC, I hope everything sorts out well for you, and we'll catch you next week. So here on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, if this is your first time listening, we're going to review board games. We're then going to talk about a topic in board gaming. This case is going to be loaded words in the language we use when we talk about the hobby. Finally, we'll be hyping games on our way out the door. Before we get started with any of that, thanks to our sponsor, Game Surplus, bringing the world of board games to you at GameSurplus.com. Find them. You can use some discounts and coupon codes and stuff, all sorts of goodies that you can find in the fillers in between our different segments here during the episode. So you'll definitely be able to find out how to save some money with the podcast picks. The podcast pick section of the Good Board Ugly section on Game Surplus. So check them out. Carmen, thank you for sponsoring us, and thanks for all the wonderful things you do for this hobby. That guy, by the way, he's an old school Avalon Hill wargamer. He's got some antiques in his house. Some antiques from the olden days of 2002 when, game companies used to put out magazines and people used to buy them and read them, and they didn't just, sit on shelves and not get purchased and not get made anymore. So, but Carmen shared some pretty cool things. He's been around for a while, and he really understands and gets the hobby. So you can find out how great customer service an expert gamer, as well as just a wonderful individual, can bring you GameSurplus.com. Also, thanks to Elaine for helping out with that business as well. Let's go ahead, guys, and kick off our reviews with what I believe to be our let's see, the first review. I want to hear from you, Trent, because I feel like this seems like maybe a bit of a lighter game for you to review, maybe more of a family style game.
I'm going to be reviewing an abstract game called Blooms.
Okay.
The game Blooms is designed by Nick Bentley, who has designed a number of abstracts. And Blooms is really easy to explain. It takes place on a hex board. So just imagine a group of hexes together where there's 4 hexes on each side. And so you end up with, I don't know, 31 hexes, I think is my count. So basically there's 4 hexes on each side that basically makes up a single large hex. Imagine a hex, a ring around the hex of more hexes, a ring around that of more hexes, a ring around that of more hexes. That's the basic board. That's the force. They call it the hex 4 board. If you want to get a little bit more complicated, use a hex 5 board, so it's 5 rings. And the hex 6 board is 6 rings. That's like 91 spaces. Okay, so this game is really simple. It's like Go. Basically, each player has 2 colors of stones. So rather than Go, where you only have 1, you have 2. To start, the first player puts 1 stone of either of his colors in an empty space, and then you alternate plays. On your turn, you can either put a stone of 1 color on any empty space, a stone of your other color on an empty space, or a stone of each of your colors on 2 different empty spaces. That's all you do on your turn, so you keep alternating back and forth. As soon as a group of light-colored stones is surrounded, so it's on my turn, and then at the end of my turn, one of my opponent's has a group of their colored stones that's surrounded, and doesn't have any breathing room and can't possibly ever grow again, they're eliminated. You take all those stones off the board, and you score a number of points equal to the stones removed. Depending on the size of the board, there's a victory point total you're aiming for. On a 4x4 on a hex 4 board, you're aiming for 20, and the first person to get there is the winner. That's all there is to the game. That's it. And it feels like Go. It feels like a much more approachable version of Go, but it's also deep enough that you end up sitting there staring at the board not knowing what to do next. As my son and I have learned, you sit there and you're just like, I don't know what to do next. I really have no idea what to do next. I will say, I mean, you can go to the Board Game Geek website and look up Blooms and literally print off the board on a single sheet of paper, provided you have 4 different colors of stones, and just play it. We actually have been using mini poker chips, which work perfect for this. So if you have a set of miniature poker chips, you can literally just go print this off on 1 sheet of paper and play it. And it just works like a charm. It's a really slick game. On the small board, it takes about 10 minutes. On bigger boards, each row of hexes you add outwards probably doubles the game length, I would guesstimate, because it gets a lot harder. And another thing I really like
tack?
is
tack. That like in that way, is it kind of like tack?
Kinda. I will say one thing it really has going for it is the board really looks aesthetically pretty, especially on the bigger boards near the end of the game, because it's got the intermeshing 4 colors, and it ends up actually having a lot of visual appeal, assuming you're using, colorful pieces, so you can easily tell them apart. But it's a really solid abstract for as simple as it is.
So it's almost like an organic form of art.
Kinda. It can kind of feel like that later on. There's also an AI program that you can play against, again, on the Board Game Geek website. It's called II. I don't know, but it's a weird name for it. But you can play against a computer if you want to get a taste for it. If you have a bunch of mini poker chips, or just 4 stones of different colors, or 4 sets of little miniature Chessex dice of 4 different colors, you can play this. You don't have to go buy anything. And it's really enjoyable. It's a nice little pleasant abstract that is deeper than it seems at first glance. With the rules, you'd think, well, there isn't going to be much to this, and there really is. It's like Go. There's 3 rules to Go, and once you know them, you think, well, this can't be too much to it until you play it once and you realize there is.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's a lot like Go. It feels a lot like Go, but it's quicker, and I like the fact that you can take 2 moves per turn. And the color restriction's really interesting. And also, it's on a hex board rather than a square board, what Go is. So, I mean, it's different enough that it's engaging, and I find that it feels like it plays quicker. Maybe because I'm playing it on a smaller board, but I don't really think that's the case. I think it's a really nice, sweet little abstract, and given that it's so easy to get, I'd recommend giving it a shot if you like abstracts.
Yeah, literally just print it off and use your own counters. This is the most accessible game you could possibly have. Does not appear to be a full production. If somebody's looking to find this on their own, no, you're going to have to print and play it, I believe.
I think Nick Bentley, the designer, he's designed several abstracts in the last few years, and I think he's going to do I've heard rumors that he's going to do like a Kickstarter, but that's like several of his games in one.
Okay.
And this would be one of them, like a collection, like a gift type collection, except it's all his games in like one box.
Cool.
So it'll be like those things you buy in like mass market that's like chests and cards and all that, except not crappy.
Yeah,
except for like really good games. Yeah, like a really good set of abstracts.
Comparison, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I really highly recommend giving Blooms a shot. It's really straightforward. All you have to do really, if you have a set of 4 different colors of pieces that are fairly small, all you need to do is go print off the map off of Board Game Geek. Or if you have a copy of the game GIF, the GIF board is a 4x4 board, is the appropriate size of this for a simple game of it.
Wow. Cool. Well, and you know, to go along with what you were saying about it being artistically, you know, like aesthetically pleasing, it was originally inspired, it says here on the Board Game Geek page, by a work of computer-generated art, algorithmic art by artist Ralph Turner. So it's originally inspired by art, and what it sounds like is somehow this game system is able to organically create that same type of algorithmic art. So really cool, Trent. Thanks for sharing. That's Blooms by the designer Nick Bentley, and you can find pretty much everything you need to know about that game and actually be able to print it yourself on the Board Game Geek page.
And play against an AI if you're curious.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to do a quick review here. Before I move into my quick review, so we'll do a quick review, then Andy, and then I'll do another review, kind of, because I noticed that it didn't come up in either of your guys' reviews here, Trent and Andy. But anyway, that's how we're structured from here on till our topic. First of all, if you haven't checked out our cardboard cohorts, you probably should if you like great content in board gaming media. Norm is doing an amazing, fantastic job putting together a variety of different episode styles. He's got a new question and answer style where he tries to basically ask questions for guest hosts to figure out what their board gaming tastes like, exactly hone in on what they appreciate about board games. So check out those most recent episodes, as well as the backlog of Cardboard in the Classroom and Cardboard Conjecture. So check out the Bridge City Board Gamers, by the way. I don't think I said their name. Bridge City Board Gamers on iTunes. Norm, you're doing an awesome job. Keep putting everything together there. And now you're going to hear about Gingerbread House from me. Gingerbread House is a new tile-laying game from Phil Walker Harding, who is the designer of Imhotep, the Spiel des Jahres nominated game about putting blocks of your color onto boats so then they get sailed to the pyramids to help construct different monuments in ancient Egypt. It's a simple family game that I quite enjoyed. Gingerbread House certainly seeks to also be in the kind of simpler, lighter, but this is more about tile laying. He had previous experience in Barron Park. I believe that was Phil Walker Harding. But anyway, I never got a chance to play Barron Park. So unfortunately, that is just a gaping hole in my gaming experience. But I wish I had a chance to play it, because my feelings on Gingerbread House are largely kind of like it's okay. It's kind of meh. It's not really as good as I was hoping it to be. It's fine. And let me tell you why. In Gingerbread House, there are 60 tiles that are essentially like dominoes. They have 2 different types of not 2 different types, sorry, 4 different types of gingerbread. They're just different colors. And the main thing you're doing here is you're laying down tiles, covering them up, and getting gingerbread to then spend to fill recipes, which are just cards that are out there. These are like characters like Tom Thumb, Hansel and Gretel, the 7 Dwarfs, and generally fairy tale inspired creatures. The whole thematic basis is that you are the Wicked Witch building a gingerbread house to try to attract as many of these figures as possible, as many of these fairy tale creatures as possible before the end of the game, getting the most points. So what you do on your turn is you're going to take your deck of 15 of these dominoes, these dual-sided dominoes, and everybody has 15 of them out of a pool of 60. And then you'll take your 15 on your turn. You have a hand of 3. You'll be able to lay down a tile onto your gingerbread house. There are staircases that allow you to fill space because you only have a 3x3 grid. The tiles are 2x1, and you're building a 3x3 grid. So if you're doing the math on that, you're going to end up covering everything within like 4 or 5 moves. So how does it work? Well, you build vertical, and every time you build vertical, what you cover up is the action you get to take. Most of the time, that's just collecting gingerbread, but there are also symbols that let you reserve cards, and there are symbols that let you get more staircases, and symbols that let you exchange what you've already got, which I think is kind of a boring symbol considering that most of the stuff in the game just gives you things. So why would I not just get extra stuff and then just keep hoping it's going to be worth something? So I guess it can be useful in some situations, but it feels like it's kind of a weak sauce ability. Anyway, the big thing here is you don't get the gingerbread for what you place. You get what you cover up. And if you can cover up 2 of the identical symbol, you actually get to take a third one of those things for free, whatever symbol it is. So if you get to take 2 actions that are the same, you actually get a third action. And for that reason, it gives a nice tension to trying to build as efficiently as possible to get as many double actions as possible, but then still leverage those resources. But it is still just simple recipe building. Every time you complete a 3x3 grid, every time that you complete a layer of your house, you get to choose a card that is going to give you either simple highest points in the basic game or the more complicated game, which I say only play the standard game, only play the more complicated game, never play the basic game, because these cards actually give you like different point values depending on what stuff you're doing in the game as opposed to just a set static value. These offer at least a little bit of variation, but ultimately my feelings on Gingerbread House are that it's fine, but I'm really disappointed by the way that you actually get the tiles in the game, the way that there's just 60 different tiles you shuffle and you get 15 of them, and you don't know what they all are. But that basically determines how many actions you get to take, how much stuff you have access to, whether or not you can actually get any of those stupid green gingerbreads. A lot of that just seems like it's already decided when the game starts. And you still have some things you can do back and forth. You can get wild actions to kind of try to grease those wheels and make sure that you don't end up, like stuck in a very bad spot. But at the same time, it just feels like if you've got that much variance and that much that's just decided at the beginning of the game, it means that the player interaction here is just non-existent. That's what I thought was so great about Imhotep, was that it was very interactive. And I heard positive things about Barren Park that made me believe that it was also kind of an interesting, exercise with other players. But Gingerbread House, to me, does not have the interaction that I'm really looking for. It's only a little bit of I'll take that with some of the cards, not that big of a deal, and also with the characters. But for that reason, I'm saying Gingerbread House is fine, but it's not that impressive. It's also not a Christmas-themed game like I kind of thought it was. I guess it's kind of fortunate that it looks like one, but it's just about gingerbread, the Gingerbread House from Hansel and Gretel. It's not actually about wintertime, stuff. So anyway, that's my review of Gingerbread House, which Andy won in a game I played with him. So he loves it.
Yeah, I always have a higher percentage of wins in the lighter games. I just like playing heavy ones that I'm guaranteed to lose at.
Yeah, well, it's because we all let Andy win when he plays lighter games because we hope he'll keep playing them. Maybe.
Possibly. I don't know. Actually, no, I would agree. I think it's fine. It's mostly multiplayer solitaire, but it's one that I think you could get non-gamers in a family, like, if you were on a Thanksgiving or a Christmas, that everyone could play. It'd be fairly easy to teach, I think, medium-aged children up easily. And it's in that fine category. It doesn't blow you out of the park, but it also is pretty inoffensive to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very inoffensive. My family really liked it. Like my parents really enjoyed it, and they like lighter games, and they tend to be an indicator, I think, of like whether or not it's going to be mainstream, at least palatable. I'm not saying that they weren't like hugely positive on it, but they thought it was good. They liked it. So that's enough about Gingerbread House. Andy, could you tell us your initial thoughts on something that I heard you? Well, let's just say Andy seemed to have some pretty strong emotions about it. I'll let him fill you in.
Yeah, the opposite of a potentially not offensive game. So yeah. I'm going to give some initial thoughts about the game, This Guilty Land by Hollenspiel, designed by Tom Russell. So This Guilty Land is, a potentially offensive one in the sense of, depending on the type of person you play with, because this game is about basically the politics underlying slavery in America, kind of pre-Civil War. So, essentially it's going to be a 2-player game, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth in it. And basically somebody's going to play the forces of oppression, which are kind of the ones that are trying to keep the status quo and keep slavery as is in the southern United States. And then you have the forces of justice, who are very anti-slavery. Now, ultimately, the game is kind of there to kind of teach you some underpinnings of why essentially the idea was doomed to fail. So the thesis of the game, if you will, is that the Civil War was inevitable. There was no way that these two philosophies could coexist with each other. And so that's kind of like the thesis is the Civil War was an unavoidable consequence of this situation. And so thematically it could bother people, but that actually is by design. So kind of to review this, what I'm going to do is break this into kind of 2 things: mechanics and then theme and feelings behind that theme, because I think it's worth analyzing both. So if I look at this game mechanically, what it's doing is you have a map, you have these things that are symbols that basically show influence. So you can kind of have one of 4 possible influences on each chit, and then so many chits per region that kind of represents like the political possibilities of that state. So you can be basically radicalized, which means you're like hard oppression or hard justice, or you can be what's called compromise, leaning one direction or the other. So compromise tends to go with the faction they agree with, but there's things you can do to get the compromise of the opposite color to vote for you. And then basically what you're doing within this game is you're taking actions to flip things either to more your way, or once you have them slightly your way, to move them very much your direction, kind of radicalize them. Or you're also doing things like trying to pass laws. And so the game abstracts out the House of Representatives and the Senate, which is very cool because the House is based on the total number of your colored chits that are on the board. But the Senate is based by region. So if I control the Deep South, I have this many votes in the Senate. If I control this many chits in the Midwest, I get this many votes in the Senate. And then kind of what you can do is if you're trying to tweak a law, it has to pass the House normally. There's not much you can do about that. So if you can't get the House sort of swinging your side, it can be difficult. However, once it gets to the Senate, then there's some kind of actions you can take to bring compromise over to your side and do that. It's going to cost you a lot more to deal with it, but you can do that. Usually then once you move a law one direction, that will cause counters to flip, and it also determines your victory points. So the more you can get a law in your direction, the more victory points you're going to get. The game starts out, I felt, pretty asymmetrically, because what you're going to be doing is if you're playing oppression, which I was, your goal is in-game victory points. You've got to just hoover up those as much as possible. Because when you get to end game, and this is kind of Trent and I played this, oppression essentially gets no end game points to speak of. And so like the whole game, it was looking like as oppression, I had this thing in the bag. Like it was just like, there's no way he's going to. And then when we actually worked it all out, Trent beat me by 1 point. So what looked to be actually very swingy turned out to really not be swingy at all. Like oppression has to just suck up victory points as fast as they can. And then I think their goal is to get as many in-game points as they can and then end the game quickly. Because the longer this goes on, the more justice starts picking up steam, which makes sense because the culture of the time was moving more and more. Like basically there's a lot of, historical things I've read where most people in the South knew that slavery had to be abolished at some point. It was an institution that couldn't ultimately last forever. The real thing they wanted was how you're going to do it. So the game starts off very in oppression's favor, but then it starts slowly swinging justice. Kind of like Twilight Struggle kind of starts out in favor of the Soviet bloc and moves more towards the Democratic bloc. And but
Western,
there's this really good give and take, because basically anything or almost anything I would do to move things in my favor would cause Trent to gain what's called political will, which is your main resource you're going to spend to take actions. So whenever I do things, it would give political will to Trent. So basically what it's doing is, you know, people like, look at those dang senators and what they passed. We got to put a stop to this. And it would galvanize the other side against you. So there's always this give and take. The more you can do to further yourself, the more potential you're giving to your opponent to do something against you on it. So it's this really beautiful give and take on that front. So if I'm looking at this game purely through mechanics, it's probably one of the best two-player games I've ever played.
Wow. Okay.
Quite frankly, like if you, I played a little Twilight Struggle, 1960, 13 Days, This Guilty Land. At least right now, if you gave me a choice between all of those, This Guilty Land right now on the table. The connection between the give and take is just beautiful in that game. So mechanically, this game is really, really awesome. Very unique, but definitely really awesome. It's a refinement of Tom Russell's systems and Optimatici Popularis. But definitely you can see how he's improved as a game designer. It's orders of magnitude better than that game. And that game is not bad by any means at all, but you can definitely see the evolution in game design. Now, so if you're talking about mechanics, one of the best two-player games ever played. Love it. I've been thinking about it constantly, both mechanically and kind of where I'm going next, thematically. This is a game you're going to want to be real careful with because it ultimately is about slavery. I think if you have this out in the wrong crowd, it's gonna be an issue. Trent and I both talked about it and how we liked it from looking at it from a historical perspective, and kind of how it makes you feel. But it would not. It would be hard to bring it to a public game night and have that sitting in your bag and have someone look at it. I think you can just be opening yourself up there because the art style of the counters, the cards, the box cover is there to invoke feeling. So oftentimes in a lot of games that cover these touchy subjects, they try to abstract a lot of that out so it kind of lessens what you feel. I think This Guilty Land was done very, very deliberately with that artwork and that theme to make you feel things. Because this is kind of, and this is why I did my review the way I did. As I was learning this game, I was very into the mechanics. What am I doing? How am I going to win? And really processing that and working through it and really happy with my plays. I'm like, oh man, I'm kicking butt. This is great. And then like once the rules and mechanics sort of started getting out of the way, and I looked down at the cards I was playing and thinking about what I was really doing, like, yeah, there were, I'm like, and I almost tried to then pull away from looking at my card art at that point because it caused some bad feelings. Like when you get an oppression card and it says violence, like I won't go into the description of the art that was on, but yeah, it's uncomfortable. Like, and it's there by design. This does not have the feeling that this was chosen haphazardly.
It almost sounds like you're describing the 12 Years a Slave of board games.
It really is. Like, it's there to produce feelings. So if you stop and think what you're doing is oppression, like, yeah, it could make, and that's what I said. I'm like, I really love this game. I don't know what to think about that. Like, when you stop and think about what the premise is.
Well, I mean, but you're saying you loving it mechanically makes you feel guilty?
Yeah, almost. Like, if you think about playing oppression, like, and that's what I said on
emotion.
Yeah, and I said on Twitter, I'm like, that's a brilliant thing, because I'm a little bit on the autism spectrum. And so for me, getting me to feel emotions about a medium is pretty difficult. Like, I don't watch many movies and get that tearjerker over it or anything. Like, it takes a big build up.
Oh, come on. Andy's just a big teddy bear, everyone. It's fine, Andy. Yeah, you're a tough guy.
Yeah. No, I just like, and it's not that I'm tough about it, don't cry. It's just like, it just doesn't elicit emotions from me.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm reasonably surprised I didn't get lynched at the end of like Titanic when the guy, sinks into the bottom. Apparently the thing not to say around a lot of weeping people was "Stupid homewrecker had it coming."
Wow.
But
that
anyway,
was not what I said. Yeah.
No.
That wasn't.
But anyway, I was trolling at that point. But anyway, like, I just don't often experience a lot of emotions from media like that. But this Guilty Land, first play, I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And it should be. To the point that, like, as oppression, when you have your counters and they're radicalized to your side, like, the symbol is a pair of shackles.
Wow.
Like, it is very much there to elicit specific emotions. Like, this is not something like, the big hubbub with 5 Tribes where it was just kind of casually thrown in. Like, you can tell this was deliberately done with intent to cause a certain emotional reaction in someone. And I think that was the goal, was to see what kind of conversations that could make happen, which did happen with me and Trent after the game. We had like a big talk about not only the mechanics, but how the mechanics induce feelings and how that could be good or bad. So I really like it. This has been 2 games that Trent's shown that are 2-player games that I've immediately looked at it, thought about it for a minute, and said, I know it's my choice next week. Let's bring this one to the table again. I want to see it. I want to see it again and see what that does. But yeah, I really like it. So I'll report in again here in another week or 2 after another play and kind of see, where my thoughts go on that.
It's a pretty strong initial impression. What did you think, Trent?
Very similar thoughts. It hit me emotionally in ways games usually don't. I think it's like, I genuinely felt a moral desire to win as Justice once the game got going, because they felt like they were morally right at fighting against a moral wrong in a way that games rarely represent. And it's because that the designer chose to, rather than, like Andy said, pull back on the emotional context of the game, he basically leaned in, which is a gutsy call given the theme, but it really works. He did it sensitively, but he did lean in, and that really makes this one work. It's amazing that it's that good mechanically, and it hits with that kind of gut punch emotionally. It's really impressive.
Given the premise that you described, Andy, that this is literally the forces of oppression versus the forces of justice,
right,
and the underlying philosophy that it was a doomed enterprise in the first place, that it was doomed to come down to an ideological battle, and that would not be resolved civil or diplomatically, maybe is kind of what I took from what you said.
Yeah, basically, if you even look in victory conditions in the rule book, the victory conditions is causing the civil war.
Okay.
It's just a matter of who would have had the outcome win for them and by how much. So, like, when we were done with our game, Trent beat me by 1 point. So we were thinking about that. We're like, so that essentially means the Civil War happened as reality, that ultimately the North won, but it was a very long, drawn out, bloody affair because they didn't have, you know, a huge portion of people throughout the country on their side. Like if you looked at the abstracted map regions, like the parts that were going to make up the Confederate States of America, yeah, I had full control on them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there are some abstracted things, but if you stop and think, you can make a lot of connections with this game. So if that's interesting to you, it's good. But if you play your games mostly as escapism and you don't want to have to feel or think too much, this might be one you want to avoid.
Well, it seems to me like with the premise and with the way that it's been treated and the way that it's been, it's been, you know, it's tackling the subject. It's not showing, it's not, I don't know. It like the idea when somebody plays, you know, the forces of oppression, they understand what, you know, they're understanding sort of the, like just the sort of dark emotions behind that side. You know, and it's kind of similar to having somebody play like forces in World War II. Nobody points a finger and says like, you know, you can't have somebody play, even though that would be, you know, ideologically difficult to defend. So I think that the stance is, and the way that it's being handled and tackled, you know, I've not played it, but it seems to me like that would initially make anybody who would have been kind of like, you know, like not the people that won't play the game, but people who will look at the game and try to judge it, you know, based on external factors. Yeah.
If you judge it by, basically if you can get past the box cover, I think you can play the game because the box cover pretty well. It shows it off. But a thought I just had, I guess, to think about it though, is that I think the theme in this game has been treated with respect in the same way the theme in, say, the games like Navajo Wars in Comancheria have been treated with respect by the designer. So that.
Yeah, well, very cool, Andy. And I look forward to hearing more about This Guilty Land, and maybe even I'll get a chance to play it sometime. So that was This Guilty Land by Hollandspiel and designer Tom Russell. I'm going to do a quick little mini review here because this is a first impressions for me. But overall, my thoughts on 18 Lilliput were that I almost feel like I want to give a disclaimer here to start my review, and that's that if you're an 18xxer and a diehard 18xxer, you probably know that my opinion means nothing to you when it comes to 18xx games. So just right off the bat, you know, you don't have to listen to this. And you don't have to take my words with any meaning at all. So as a matter of fact, don't hold it against 18 Lilliput that I like it. I thought that 18 Lilliput distilled elements of 18xx into something where I was actually okay with the way that the map developed organically. It's in a super simple way, but like honestly, with the way that my brain works with the tracing of lines in 18xx games, this is what I can do. Like this is what's like on the palatable. Like it started to push my limits too, just because like the trying to like sort of figure out of this map that seems like, you know, it almost just seems like I see it as one mass and I don't really dissect it. I don't really piece it out in my brain. But here it literally starts as a single card in the middle of the table, and you're building out by taking actions. These actions are tied to a set of cards depending on the number of player count, and these cards each have 2 actions. So you could draft a card to rob another player of the action on it, or to take an action for your own benefit. And these actions are the way that stock is handled, the way that train operation is handled. So it's not a traditional 18xx game. Maybe that's why I like it, because it gives me that sort of like, you know, I can deprive you of actions. You still have a way of getting around it, but it takes that, like the way that the procedural elements of an 18xx, where I feel like when somebody makes a decision, it takes 5 rounds for them to actually carry that decision out. In this game, 18 Lilliput, every single decision is a quick, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to spend this much money, and it's done. You know, like you don't start companies 1 share at a time like you do in normal 18xx games. You do it by just starting the company, and it immediately floats. You have to have enough money to float the company. I mean, it just makes sense that it works that way. And all the different elements here that I associated with like the most simple 1846 style game, where you do have light elements of Euro, very light elements of a Euro coming into just the making of the setting up of the powers. You have like a snaking draft to establish what special ability or private company you start with, as well as the first railroad company you start with, which also has a special ability tied to it. I really enjoyed that it had like a nice snake draft to do that. The elements and actions of the game make an 18xx game playable in like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And you don't have like ridiculous calculations. It still has the 18xx-ish calculations. Like you need your mini poker chips. And it feels like a full 18xx experience. You can play with all sorts of different scenarios that will actually add the existing map to the game board and then give you more to sort of like plan towards getting to. The base game as it is just starts with a single card and builds forward and builds outward, and players kind of do that at their own will. So, I mean, it just makes for a different feel to most 18xx games, but you still have the possibilities of scenarios and all different types of replayability. Honestly, it's like kind of like what I'm looking for in terms of an 18xx kit, as well as an entry point and one that I'm comfortable with. And that's why I think 18 Lilliput, if there's ever going to be an 18xx game that belongs on my shelf, it's 18 Lilliput. So that's my take on 18 Lilliput.
I think another thing to add to that, just so people, if you're interested in getting it, is there's actually 2 methods of tracking finances that are in the box, or at least the Kickstarter copy. I'm assuming that those would come out in the regular one as well. That's usually been this designer / publisher style. It's usually not exclusive. He provides paper money, which most 18xx should be like, no. But there's also a pad, like he gives this big pad. You can just do the calculations and track it on that as well. So there are a couple different options to do finances if you just get the game and you're not a train game junkie with a giant amount of poker chips like I am. But yeah, I have some interesting thoughts on it as well. But I want to hold them until I get another game or 2 of it in. Then I'll try to come at it from more like the 18xx perspective at that point.
Cool, Andy. Trent, do you have any updates on 18 Lilliput after this regular play?
No, I think it's about a perfect midpoint between Euro and 18xx.
Cool.
The action selection mechanism makes it feel like a Euro to me. It feels way more like a Euro than 1846 did.
Mm-hmm. Feels way more like a Euro than 1846. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Yeah, 1846 is more towards the 18xx line, and this is more towards the Euro line. Yep, especially that action selection is what makes it like that. Absolutely. All right, well, Andy, this topic of choice today is what language we use to describe the games that we talk about, and how that language can many times already reveal our feelings without even needing to go any further than just, oh, is that this type of a game? So why don't you, you tell us about it.
Yeah, I think on this one, the difference, because I think we did another episode on kind of like board game buzzwords before, maybe. But what I was thinking of this is like the things people choose to use to describe maybe a designer / game to other people, and how that can have like weirdly different effects depending on the person. Because I guess the way to put it this way is this. So like there was, oh God, I can't even remember what podcast I saw, but they had like 3 game publishers on it, and they were using, they were going through like what they wanted to hear in a pitch for a game even, right? and they're like, no, I need this because this is what the public wants, or that they want this. And so these ways we choose to pitch or describe games, and the fact that those phrases and terms can mean things to different people even. So less than like a word that turns us off, but more just a general description of how a game's going to play. So for example, like the big one for me is when someone's like, well, this is like a streamlined version of that game. Okay. Like that's going to have different sort of check boxes for different people. Right. Because I think the vast majority of people, when they hear, oh, this is a streamlined version of that game, they veer towards getting the new one that's streamlined. Whereas like oddball people like me are like, I want.
You still get the new one, Andy. You still get it. How's the new version of Greenland and Neanderthal going?
Oh, that's not streamlined. That's just got nicer stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I kind of came off with this because I was like, what brought it to my mind was actually when you guys did the long view on Ryan Lockett.
Yeah, I don't know. Lockett, I believe.
Yeah. When you guys were like at the end describing sort of his games and that style, like, I'm like, the vast majority of people listening to this are like, oh, I should try those games. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, I don't know if I want to. Like, and I'm not saying by any means that those games or that designer is bad. What I found interesting was that the way things were being chose to be described would have those different effects on people, right? Like, because it's just like one of my interests is like how the human brain works, and like how different people approach things differently based on that. So I kind of wanted to bring that up as a topic and kind of see what other people thought about that, or what is it they look for in a game description, or things kind of along that way. I really didn't have an intention to say one way of describing a game is bad or good, but just like how, what kind of perspectives in the board game hobby are there, and what phrases do you think they listen to? So, for example, one of our hosts that used to be on the podcast, Jonathan, right? So he's primarily like would play a lot of American style board games. If you had somebody who was into that, what would they be looking for in their descriptions of a game, right?
Yeah, no kidding. It's kind of tough to like sort of pick apart a brain, try to reach inside the brain of somebody else and see what they're looking for. But yeah, there's certain sort of just hot words, and I feel like when I look online at what people are looking for specifically regarding like 18xx games, people, there was a discussion about 18 Lilliput, Andy, that was on that we had on the wondrous Twitter, and which brings out the very best in people, and it kind of is like, here are the checklist of things that I'm looking for in a game, and I don't think this game offers any of it, so I can pretty much categorically say that this is not the game for me. I don't know if there was like, this is like not interesting was maybe what was said, so maybe it could have been a term that's like, one of those subjective terms that can get thrown around, where it's meant to be subjective, and it's kind of intended as one of those subjective terms, though, that means something totally different to you as it does to me. Like when I say this is interesting, that by itself is already very different. Like interesting, at least here in the Midwest, can mean I hate it. Like if you say, oh, that's interesting, we're all super nice and we can't just tell people we hate it, so we say that's interesting. So I mean, like, there's a certain amount of just, like cushioning of words that you could say. However, like when you use it in a game review sense, I think that just, it's like, this is a thought-provoking game. This game has me continuing to think about it after it's over. Interesting can be actually really good. And that it's interesting, meaning it defies like I'm not capable of coming up with words that are good enough, but I just want you to know that it is a positive overall feeling. I would say that like I had an experience with just in terms of loaded words, like by itself, I think our hobby could use a little bit of rebranding, like, or at least the way that I say board games. Like, it's like I almost want to, from the very beginning, get it out of the way. Like, I'm into board games, but everybody like hears board games. So just today I had my gamers club, went fantastic. Super Smash Brothers Ultimate came out, and that just kind of ruled the day, I want to say. But at the same time, Nyctophobia was played, and the role-playing aspects of Nyctophobia have made it the perfect fit for my group at school, which is has a vision-impaired student that loves to get in the spirit of the game, and other kids that enjoy to get in that spirit, but also enjoy board games in general and try to, like, outsmarting each other. And anyway, it was perfect. But I was kind of saddened when I heard that one of the kids that showed up one of the kids that kind of chose not to show up to Gamers Club was because he had no interest in board games. And it was the way that it was said that I was like, oh, and I think that came up in our chat just a second ago, John. John in our chat said it's so much of it is about the delivery. So if I say like this is a run-of-the-mill Euro, like that's different than if I say this has all the elements of Euro that I'm looking for. So just in terms of like how these words get said, like just the spirit of the term can be a big difference. But obviously, like there's only so much that you can get out in written form, and so then it ends up making it sound in written form like people who are just passionate about something are actually like, no, this is goddamn it's truth. If you don't describe to this, then you're not a robot like me, and you don't process information the same way as me. So there's vocabulary use. Like you could call something a Euro, and I almost wonder if like calling game design that focuses on why do we even use the term Euro? Why is it like I feel like I almost see the battle between Euro and then I think the word, so you didn't say this, Andy, but you should have, Ameritrash, which Jonathan has just fully embraced. He's fully embraced that term. It's like it's totally like, no, Ameritrash is my thing. But I feel like Ameritrash to me might be a retaliatory term. Like just calling game design that's from Europe a Euro might seem innocuous enough, but I feel like that would be something that a European wouldn't necessarily think to say. Like it's almost like saying like, oh, it's a way to sort of marginalize, or at least sort of categorically say this is different. And especially with all the games that are out there now, like there's so many hybrids in so many different directions, and to a certain extent there are elements of both. Euro focusing on gameplay elements, and American style, whatever people want to call it, Ameritrash focusing on thematic elements. Like people want to have elements of both of those, and I think the finest products have them both. So even that big divide in our hobby has, like all these different cases, specific cases that define it. So ultimately, it's about labeling, right? It's about labeling, and whenever we start to sort of slap labels, it's like, what are the labels for? Are the labels so that you can sort of say, I don't like it because it's this, or is the label because you want to say like I like this and I want to see more of it? I mean, there's all kinds of different directions you can turn, and I wonder how Trent takes this topic.
I think it's more. I agree with you. I think it's less the words and more the tone of voice that can drive people away. I think if you make it seem, you can make it seem bad, or you can make it seem elitist by the tone of your voice. More than anything else. I think that's honestly the most important approach to it. Just make it seem like a normal thing and things go fine.
Yeah. Another way to look at that is even like the idea of different weights of games or whatever. Like it's easy. I don't know. Have you guys, I don't know if I've heard this, but, let's say if people prefer lighter style games, like I feel like they don't often, say heavy games with the same sort of disdain as someone who's a heavy gamer could say at light games.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if people are just like, if they really like light games, they're just like, that's too much for me is kind of what they say. But if you have a heavy gamer that's kind of like, a little too self-important. You know, they can look at light games and be like, no, that game, no, it's too easy, or it's too light. I don't like that. Like, have you guys gotten that sense in the community? Like, I'm not saying I did. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think that it gets used both ways. I think it gets used, like when you say heavy game, it means something. It means something different. Like some people think, like, ooh, horror story, and when you say light game, I think the same thing happens. I think that there can be people that are affected the same way, but I honestly still think that doesn't mean that heavy gamers won't play light games and light games won't be, like people. I don't think that there's such a thing as just heavy gamers and light gamers. I think we're just all gamers. And I mean, there is always there's not a single heavy gamer that doesn't, that can't point to at least one heavy game that wasn't for them. I think it's the same way with light gamers. Like, we still have preferences with them. And even the fact, like I said, that I'm using that I'm trying to categorically define people by their taste in board games. Like, it just, so much of it has to do with the attitude that you take when approaching a game. If you come into a game like Axis and Allies, which is, from my eyes, more trouble than it's worth. But if you come into that with the right attitude, there are countless people over history, including many that are listening to this right now, have, dealt with that awful rule book, who have dealt with how long that game takes, dealt with how procedural it is, dealt with so much of the overhead of that game, and with so many of the elements that make it kind of less desirable, in maybe a randomness aspect, if that's what people are looking for at all. But people have dealt with that, and it was like, it might not be a heavy game, but it's certainly a big undertaking for anybody who's unfamiliar with the system, especially if you're trying to learn it right out of the box. That's disastrous. I can tell you that from experience. It's still so much so about is the attitude that you take from it. And I feel like if somebody is looking at what a game has to offer and then saying, I'd rather step back and not play this game, that's fine. That's fine. But what I don't get is when you hear somebody else talking about a game, that you would then care to share that view with everybody else. To me, a withdrawal from a game or a withdrawal from an experience is not something worth telling everybody about, especially not people that are just about to engage in that experience. They want to have the most positive outlook on it as possible, and you want to come in and start peeing into their cereal. Like, it's just, people are excited because they want to play this, and it's like, I'm going to shine negativity on this. Like I said, negativity at the beginning of this episode, it can be like that sort of smoke detector feeling. We're like, okay, negativity can help me to know, that I'm not having a good time. But if I leave that sort of negativity just blaring in my mind and I let the negativity make all the decisions for me, it becomes a little bit more intense and a little bit more especially if you want to fight the battle from a negative point of view with somebody who's just trying to have fun. And last time I checked, none of us were going to be evaluated based on our game choice or game taste. So, if it's fun for one person.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, except for Andy. Andy deserves to be held, to a much higher standard than anybody else. But yeah.
No, I look at people's games boxes and I'm like, they're not good people. No, that's fine. No, I don't do that. But
Andy,
but
says the guy who owns this guilty land.
I don't own that. That was Trent's copy.
You don't own it? Oh, no. Wow. Now I feel like I should shame you for not owning it.
No. I will once I get that extra, sweet research money stuff. Yeah. No, it did move to a must buy for me, but I don't own a copy yet.
It does sound like it, yeah.
Yeah, but oh God, where was I? I had a thought earlier. But I get to what you're saying. So I think that the tone and phrase matter. Another thing I think to remember is, there's always something more or less difficult than what you're doing. You can have the heavy Euro gamer and they're like, oh, look at that, this is a heavy Euro game, and that they're at the pinnacle, and then your 18xx player sits down and they're like, yeah. And they can get elitist about it. And then, then you have your war gamer come in and look and go, it's like a 20-page rule book. It's like Gateway, man. And then, in the pinnacle, I'm sure they're out there, but you could have your campaign for North Africa fanatics are just you're all posers, it can always be worse or more somewhere. you know, I mean, it could happen in all walks of life. Like, for example, to even use a sports metaphor, like I've taught primarily in small school districts, and you can have your kid who's the star athlete of a small school district and think he's all that, and then go to a 4A school and he's like a bench warmer.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I was just talking with a kid yesterday about he might be moving from our school where I teach, which is kind of more of a rural area, to a larger area. He's like, I'm just not going to get to play at any sports.
But yeah, like, no, that's like a thing. And so, and I don't think it's necessarily like good to crap on anyone's thing. And what basically for me, like, I'm always like, there's some things I want to go to game night to play or not, but if anyone sits down with me and they're like, I haven't played a lot of games, but I really want to play that one you got that's the heavy game, I'm not going to sit and tell that person, you should probably go start. I'm like, okay, you want to play a heavy game? Let's do that. I will teach you the rules. I will coach you as much as you need or want, and we'll work through this. Like, you can use game language, attitude, presence, and whatnot to push people away, or you can use it to bring them in. There will be games that I tend to avoid at game night, mostly just because, like, I know I'm not going to have a great time playing it, and I don't want that to make somebody else have a bad time, because one thing about me is also I really suck at hiding my emotions and lying. So if I'm like having a bad time at something, like, it's pretty clear. And that can make other people feel bad. Like, nobody wants to be the person that suggests a game and then somebody at the table is just really hating it. Like, because that makes you feel bad. If I bring out a new game and, I didn't do my homework or something, and I'm, one or two people playing it are like just really having an awful time. Not like, it was all right, but I don't want to play, but like visibly hating every minute of what they're doing. Like, it's hard not to take that personally or feel bad about it. So language can be useful in the sense, or game descriptions in a way to help determine what's going to give you the best bang for your buck, what's the best time. But if you're using it as a weapon to gatekeep, yeah, I think that's where it becomes an issue.
I would say, like, I'm looking at this right now through the lens of another one of my passions and hobbies from a young age, when I've done with my family, and that's fishing. There's a saying in fishing that's, a good day of fishing, or a bad. Okay, of course I'm going to screw up the saying. It's a simple saying. All right, so I should say a bad day of the good, the bored, and the ugly is every day of the good, the bored. No, anyway, but a bad day of fishing is better than a good day of work. And I don't hear that about gaming. And it's because it becomes personal. It's like you're not just playing a game with somebody. You're playing something that's the experience that somebody's trying to get. And it could be for themselves. It could be, they're doing it fairly generously and doing it for you. And that happens to me frequently. I am so frequently surrounded by people that are determined to try to make a positive experience out of a game, and it's like it could be a game that they know that they like, and one that they know that I might like, I might not like, but they really want to share that with me. You really want to share that with me. I see that both from both sides of the spectrum that can include all these types of games. There's no like side to this. It's just a giant continuum. And there's games that people know that maybe I've edged on the continuum a little bit too far to really still have, this within my sphere of interest. But there's still, like, I'd still take one of those experiences over, I would take like the absolute most, picked off of a list of check boxes of all the perfect things in a game. If you really want to say, I can sit down at a game that's full of people I loathe and still enjoy it because I love the game. Yeah, well, think about it like this, 18xx players. What if you sat down at a game of 4 players, you're one of the 4 players, and the other 3 players decide that all they're going to do is try to use the track of the companies they own to create a shape on the board of a, let's just say, a rude, offensive symbol. And that's all they do with the game. Don't care at all about the gameplay or anything. Are you going to be able to get an experience out of that you find entertaining? I mean, people can make you miserable. We are capable of it. Actually, we're not just capable of it. We're programmed for it. Like, I can ask you right now, somebody close to you, like right now, do you know what word it takes to make them extremely upset? Do you know what to say to make the people close to you upset? I'm pretty sure you do. I know I do. We all kind of do. And it's like we can do that. We are so capable of seeing what's wrong with everything else in the world outside of ourselves, because it makes it less, it's less about us now. It's, the focus is on something else because of how hypercritical we can be to ourselves. And I honestly think that, like, when we focus on these types of, like if you hear somebody say, I enjoyed this sort of experience, it's one thing if you're really close to that person, you're like, I really didn't know after I learned about it. It didn't seem that interesting to me, but, go ahead and tell me. That's a little bit different than like, hey, I'm the gatekeeper of this community, and you've just said something that identifies you of being not worthy. I'd just like you to defend yourself here quickly before I put you before the tribunal, at which point you will be, you will have to narfle the Garthok.
Yeah. Leave the game store. Yeah, and I know what you mean. And it's interesting, like, and kind of like, Paul said in our chat here is we often use a lot of terms in gaming and even everyday life that we think are objective terms. Like, your favorite word there for board games there, Joe, fun. Like there are people you can tell when they're doing their reviews and stuff that they honestly are using fun as if it's an objective term. Mm-hmm. There's like, this game is fun.
It's not a Euro, it's fun.
Well, or not even that. Like, they could.
That's my experience with seeing it is.
Well, true. But they could even use it with a Euro. But if they tack it on, like, I play this game because it's fun, that really is using that term objectively rather than subjectively, right? Because you're not saying, I find it fun because you're saying fun. This game is fundamentally fun. Like, that is a universal law of this game. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good to inject positivity into an experience and saying, like, hey, you having fun? I'm having so much fun. Like, that can really, like, just like sort of a thumbs up, high five, let's keep going, let's keep having fun, and I do, like, I still use it when I'm, dealing with board games, even though I come on to this podcast and say anybody who says fun is, not worthy of my ear, of my airtime. But it really is a helpful term, like, hey, did you guys have fun? I almost always ask the table that, and I want them to come out of it with a positive experience. I hear my kids at my gamers club, throw shade and say negative things about different types of games, ones that they're not as into as other ones. And a lot of the ones that play only Fortnite judge anything that's not like kill, murder, with very, very heavy, like, oh, no, I'm not into video games. I just play Fortnite. I think there's a lot of individuals right now with how much that it's grown, that like video games have grown, especially recently with like Fortnite, that are, in that sort of camp of like, no, I don't play video games. I just play Fortnite. There's a lot of board gamers that are, like, that play a single game, but I don't hear people shut the door towards the rest of board games, except that's exactly what you've been talking about, Andy, because we do hear that, and that shutting door does happen. It does happen. It's not done. I mean, it's done by people that, people who only play Fortnite have the excuse, or I guess at least my excuse for them is ignorance. But a lot of times the individuals that say, that use terms, sort of like weaponize these words, are not, don't have that sort of naivety that I can sort of forgive them for, but rather it's like a sort of willful ignorance. Now, if you're shutting that part of the hobby out, then why waste your time commenting on it? Why waste your time trying to, put your opinion into somebody else's experience? You know, like giving an unsolicited opinion is fine if you're like, ooh, I really like that. But as soon as you want to start saying something negative, it becomes like, it's that sort of like the reason you never say a bad day of gaming is better than a good day at work, because literally a bad day at gaming can hang into your next day at work and can still make it come up that like, you're like, oh my gosh, my hobby, can I even still do this after having that type of an experience? Because it can be really stressful.
That's why I quit World of Warcraft. Trying to manage it, be an officer in a guild, managing a guild was more stressful than being around 100 middle schoolers in a day.
Exactly, dude. And that's the thing. Like, a bad day of gaming is like worse than a bad day at work, because you have to work. And it's like you accept it, like there's going to be bad days and I have to get over them because I have to work. But not gaming. It's like if I have a bad day gaming, it makes me think like, should I continue on? And that's so reasonable. It's so reasonable because this is something we do for fun. So if something that you're doing for fun is causing somebody else's thing that they do for fun, I'm trying to say fun as many times as I can, by the way, fun. You know, as soon as that sort of happens, and you know, like I'm gaining my enjoyment by like standing up here on my tower and looking down at you and the rest of the plebs, like, yeah, that's like you said, Andy, it's gatekeeping. And
yeah, like, you know, an example for myself is like, I detest trivia games. Like, I don't want anything to do with a trivia game, which is mostly my own hang up because I'm like a geek brain laser focused. So, you know, trivia games require a large breadth of knowledge, and mine's very narrow, but just super deep in those regions. So, like, if it's a question I know, yay. If it's not, I have no prayer. So I don't like them, but I don't then, you know, like go on Twitter and go, all trivia games are crap. Like anyone who likes trivia games is like, I don't make fake Twitter accounts to troll trivia game designers, you know, be like, you know, like you make trivia games, like, you know,
I don't go around and seek people out like that. Yeah. It's just
right. But there are people that literally do that. I'm like, what is wrong with you? But seriously, yeah, and I think that's the thing is, if you're using these ways of describing games designers and other things as a weapon, like to say something is lesser than something else, I think that's where it's going problematic. If you're using it as a way to get an idea of it's something you would enjoy. So if you have a knowledge of mechanics, a knowledge of what these terms are often used as, you can use them as a way of saying, oh, you know, I'm probably not going to like that game. And if I don't like that kind of game, odds are I don't know if I, you know, for me personally, this is my thought process. Okay, this game's been described as this, whatever that may be. Odds are I'm probably not going to enjoy that game. So if it try to, not necessarily, I wouldn't like stamp my feet and say my way or the highway. I'm not playing that game. But if there was a choice between that game and a different game that I don't know about or don't like, I may steer myself that way. But I'm doing so not just in the best interest of myself, but the best interest of the experience that is going to happen at that table. Because I know I can't hide things very well. And so I don't want to end up playing a game that I know I'm going to hate. So because I don't want to make other people feel bad either, because I know I feel bad as a game teacher if other people don't enjoy it. And so, you know, if someone's like, let's play this apples to apples clone party game, I'm just like, no, that's, no, I'm not going to, not because I think it's awful, but because I will not have a good time. I will not, you know, play within the spirit of the game because I'll get bored. It's going to be bad for me and it's going to be bad for you. Like, you know, so I think that's okay if you use it as a way to see if you're interested in things, because quite frankly, like, you've got to use some kind of taxonomy when you have literally over 1,000 games being published just at Essen. You've got to have a way to sort through that mess of information. And I think as long as you're using it for that purpose, it's fine. But if, you're using it, like you said, as a gatekeeper, some people are like, worker placement is objectively always better than deck building. Like, that's where it's why no, that's where things are a problem, with languages and descriptions.
Yeah.
And it's a trap you can find yourself in. I think even the best humans at times can, if you don't think about it, you can just throw out something that ends up being callous. And I don't think everyone who does that means it that way. But I think it's something to watch for,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Is there any closing thoughts? Haven't heard from you in a minute, Trent.
Not really. Like I said, I really think tone is the most important thing here. I really, really do. I think like the word choice, is important to an extent, but I think, you can say, let's play a board game and let's play a board game in very different ways, and they mean different things. And I think people gravitate more towards the tone than anything else.
Right.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you have to, sometimes people feel like when they follow their first instinct, they're being quote unquote real. And, yeah, there's something about reality that's not always what it's cracked up to be. So, sometimes your instincts might feel good to you and might put you up a little bit higher. But there certainly are ways in which it can discourage people from wanting to play with you, discourage people from wanting to play a game, or discourage people from wanting to play. And that certainly is not going to help the hobby to grow and further fuel your group or further fuel your participation. Because even if people are not engaging in the type of the hobby that you're interested in, they have to feel like it's accessible enough for them. And when people are getting that sort of treatment, it's just hard to do.
Right. So. Yeah, and basically to kind of piggyback off that is my final thought, because I often, when I was teaching middle school and with my daughter as she's gone through the teen years, I'm like, if you have to use the qualifier, I don't mean to be offensive, you're about to be offensive. Or if what you're saying requires you then to say, I'm just saying, or I'm keeping it real, you're probably being a butthole. Like, you just, if one of those qualifiers is needed to what you're going to say, probably the best thing you could do is just not say it at all.
Well, really, present me has learned a lot of lessons that when I first started to talk, had I not been so wrong, maybe I wouldn't have wanted to talk to people so much. Who knows? But certainly things have changed, and I think that the perspective that has kind of emerged, that has been a lot of contributions, specifically from members of the community through this podcast, specifically you guys. I mean, more than anything, by getting to discuss things with you guys, it becomes clear that, once you start to put yourself in other people's shoes, especially once you have somebody really ruin an experience, or take actions that you specifically had to sort of turn on your survival mode instincts to get through, I think you kind of start to analyze more aspects of behavior. So
yeah, I think we should start a pool, counting up how many times did Trent in the early days of all of our group in gaming think to himself, God, these guys don't know enough to know that they sound stupid.
Not going to say anything about that.
So on to our hype now, and that is going to get kicked off. I've got 6 of these that I'm going to do, so I'm just going to say their names. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to hype them all. Cerebria. Oh, I want to say more than that, but I'm just going to say Cerebria. The Dinosaur Island, which I also got the 2-player and the expansion that I'm looking forward to cracking open. Teotihuacan, and kind of a different, my actual hype, I should say. I didn't get a chance to talk at all about this. Certainly not necessarily in the wheelhouse that you'd usually expect to hear from me. But I want to say that those that are looking for for kind of a structure to the interactions and the discussions that you already have. There was a very well-run Kickstarter page where basically a legacy party game entitled Destroy These Cards can offer you the sort of like just a little bit more structure to the sorts of like, discussions and dares and challenges that you might already sort of just engage in. And I would say that like the first game that I think of when I see the structure of this game is Quelf. I'm not a huge fan of Quelf, but I think that the things that I see are added in this game add enough things to make it sort of modernized, and it still is one of those games that you're going to play because of the memories that you come from and not so much because of the intricate gameplay. However, I do think that it doesn't do the stupid thing that Quelf does, which is just like by not playing the game, you can just be like, I'm not going to take the punishment. So essentially by signing up to play this game, it's almost like I'm like signing up for a game to peer pressure me. And I don't necessarily see that happening as bad here. So maybe not in my wheelhouse, but I hopefully have been able to use no loaded words describing it, because I am very impressed by how it didn't include, it wasn't just trying to sell like another Cards Against Humanity clone. To me, it sort of rose above what I'm used to seeing when I see like a like a party game listed on Kickstarter. So certainly not going to be for everybody, but you should take a look at it if that at all sounds interesting to you. I'm talking about Destroy These Cards. I think the Kickstarter is now successfully run, but you could certainly get in touch with the designer on that Kickstarter page and be able to find more about it. That was my hype. And now we're going to hear from Trent telling us about a game from a designer who's actually been on the podcast.
Yeah, actually, that occurs to me that he has.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten all about him being on here. It'd been a long time ago. This is Crusaders That Will Be Done. It's by Seth Jaffe. I was mostly interested in this because it seemed to have an interesting rondel mechanism, and I kind of trust the designer because he designed Eminent Domain, which I dearly love. So I have this in my hands, and it's got an interesting rondel mechanism. I've read the rules a couple times. It seems like it's pretty straightforward to play. It's a deluxeified game from TMG, which means the pieces are almost needlessly nice. Like, over the top nice. I will say this is interesting. They have a full set of all the pieces in it in both plastic and wood. So if you prefer plastic minis, that's great. If you prefer wood, you can go either way with it.
Can you mix them in the same game?
I bet you could. I don't see why you couldn't.
Just to upset all the heroes. All the people are like, I want my wood in my game.
Yeah, it'd have a weird aesthetic effect. It seems interesting, and I hope to play it soon.
Be funny if there was one faction that was only wooden pieces and one faction that was only plastic pieces, to represent maybe like advances in technology. You could actually play around with that. All right, that's
cardboard chips, wood, metal, and plastic.
No resin.
Oh, that's the fifth. That's the fifth player expansion, Andy.
It's the secret sauce. Yeah.
Oh, that's what they should totally do, is each player is an asymmetrical material and see who fights over what group of components.
Nice. Well, Andy, I'm not even trying to pronounce.
That's what Trent thinks of my
comment. I'm exhausted. It's just I'm tired.
Well, that's the correct way to approach somebody who's clearly said something that they say it, and they just want to see what you do.
I do that Andy, with my children a lot.
Andy, I'm not going to say that I trust your spelling, but I'm going to trust that at least this word you spelled correctly, because there's nothing I've ever seen like it. What are you hyping?
So I'm actually hyping a prototype I was given. And so, like, I belong to the train game group something Facebook page. And there was a guy on that showed pictures of a game he had designed. He had just kind of dusted it off, the shelf of designs kind of thing, and asked if anyone wanted to try it. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at it. And so he sent me the files, and I print and played it. Of course, overdoing it as I tend to do. So, I laminated everything and 3D printed stuff. But the game is called, and I will butcher this pronunciation, I am sure, Norgesbanen, but it's basically about railways in Norway. And so the basis of this game is it's a Winsome style sort of cube rails game. The difference is, and I don't know if you've. Yeah, no, you have, Joe. So like the Winsome games can take a couple different styles on the train games, right? There's the ones that have your hexes, like your Paris Connection and Iberian rails. But Northern
Chicago Express, yeah. Cube
right.
rails.
And Northern Pacific's a different style where there's just connections and circles.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I didn't even realize that was a distinction, but yeah, I definitely get what you're saying.
Yeah. And so this one's kind of like that in the sense that it's there. So what happens in this game, as I've been able to read it, which makes it interesting, is it's kind of like a Winsome game, except kind of a Winsome plus. Like Winsome kind of distills everything down to this very simple mechanic. And this one has a lot of timing aspects in it. So you're actually going to buy companies or buy into companies. They're going to pay out, and they're ultimately going to get bought from you. Like the government will nationalize the railroad away, but you will get more money when that happens. So every company like you get in, you are temporarily involved in. And so you kind of set it up to what makes you most of the money. And what's kind of cool, though, about this one is if you look on the board, each railway is on the board and has a set number of places you can put cubes, right? So let's say like, I don't remember the name of it, but the Purple Railroad is started, right? So there might be a place on the map that has 5 circles that correspond to this Purple Railroad. And on your turn, you can either buy into the railroads or you can place cubes. And as soon as 5 cubes have been placed in that route, the route pays out. And so that gets interesting because depending on the number of cubes in the cities and stuff, that route can make more money. And then what can happen is this. So when it pays out, like the company's going to take half. Whoever has the leftmost share, sort of like the president's share, takes half of the remaining half. And then whoever's behind them gets split up like your normal dividends kind of thing. But then it rotates to whoever had the second share is now the president when it pays out again. Oh, and by the way, it's going to pay out more the second time than it did the first time. And so, like, there's all these weird timing elements in the game. Like, there might be reasons why you don't want to be the first one to jump on a railway. You want to be the last one because it's going to pay out more money then. And then what's going to happen as soon as, like, the debt is covered by the money that the company itself takes, like, it nationalizes. Immediately, it's gone. You're going to lose everything you had in that company, but you're going to get paid out. And so the fact that the stocks go up in value, you're going to make money. So it's got a lot of little aspects of correct timing into it that makes it just a little bit more complex than your standard Winsome. Like this is kind of like a slight tier above like a Chicago Express or something. So I'm really interested to see how all of this plays together and how it works out. But there's definitely a lot to do with timing. There's going to be a lot of cross incentives going on. I don't think there's going to be situations where you're the only one invested in a company. And in fact, if you play it with more than the minimum player count, the minimum's 3, it goes 3 to 6. If you play with more than 3, then only 3 people will be the first, president of a railway. You can only start 3 at the beginning. And so it immediately gets this cross investment sort of like, who do I want to like be with and how are we going to help each other thing? Because there's different mechanisms in the game to bring in a new company. You can't just say, I'm going to start a new company. It has to happen within certain certain situations, but those situations are not random. Like you can set it up so that it happens in your favor if you can get the timing correct. So like it almost feels a little like Zulkin in that regard, and that you have to have this, okay, I'm going to do this, I want this to pay out then so that I can do this kind of thing. But it very much is a cube rails game with that. So it's like a cube rails with like super heavy timing. So I thoroughly expect to suck horribly at this game, but I just want to see. It's one of those, I really want to put it on a table and see what happens kind of things. So anyway.
Cool. Yeah, the game, I'm still not going to try pronouncing it.
I'm sure I butchered it. If we have any listeners in Norway, they're screaming at their screen right now.
Nice. All right, well, and that's actually all the time that we have. I suppose maybe the last thing to do is to invite everybody to our guild, which Andy started doing, and listening to the last few weeks' podcast, I'm like, man, you did a good job of that, Andy. So what are we going to start calling games instead of Ameritrash? That's just, that's what I'll say as our conversation starter. But, what's an experience you've had that has either, where words have maybe brushed you in a way that you felt like wasn't exactly fair to what a game experience could have, or maybe it was a time that, you stopped yourself from saying a term because of the people that you were around, and you kind of found a more diplomatic phrase to use, on the fly. And I feel like that's how a lot of terms can get invented, because that like, well, I know how I've called this game before, but I'm not really going to say Ameritrash to somebody who I've never met because I might be stomping on all of their favorite gaming experiences. So anyway, come join us in our Board Game Geek Guild, which you'll find on Board Game Geek. And you can join in to the discussion about this podcast episode. You can do that right on the link where the video is, the YouTube video is right there on our page, or you could start your own forum. Anyway, welcome you to the guild. And thank you, Andy, for starting that tradition of inviting people to a guild with an actual conversation prompt.
Yeah, it's a good time. We also have a Slack channel.
Yeah, Andy, I'll let you talk about that. I'm not very good
Board Ugly, if you want to get onto it. Tell
me
how wrong I am about everything. It's fine.
Andy, thank you for keeping that up. Yeah. All right. So, oh boy. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me, Trent. Thanks for joining me, Andy. Everybody here in the chat, it has just been fantastic to read what you guys have been saying and inject those bits of wisdom into our episode. Thank you all for being here and joining us. I'm Joe Sallin. I've been joined by Trent Ham, by Andrew Dennison. This has been an episode of The Good, the Board, and the Ugly. Hope you all have a great week of gaming, and catch us next week on The Good, the Board, and the Ugly.